like a golden for the purposes of this presentation, the golden goose is the grant funding, right? We're on the same page? Excellent. All right. So she needed to do a couple of things. And the first one was to come up with a storyline. The storyline goes from your problem to the solution, and it helps you find the type of grant that you want and actually write the grant. So for Evangeline, she lived on a farm. She had all the accoutrements except for a horse. So her problem was she doesn't have a horse, and she would take her golden goose and use it to purchase a horse. All right, so that's kind of how this, oh, what has been done to address the problem? She's got the farm, she's got the stall, she's got the feed, she's got all the stuff for the horse, but she doesn't have the horse. So the gap is the horse. What she's going to do, she's going to use her golden goose to buy a horse. Feels a little repetitive. And I know this next one, there's a lot of words. This kind of brings it home to you guys. I'm going to let you guys just read this. I'm not going to read it to you. Okay, it's pretty good. We're going to keep moving on. So now that you've got your storyline, you can begin researching. The first thing to know is that there are 4 main types of grant funding. The first one is competitive funding. This is where funding is based on the merits of the application. Nobody's predetermined. So this is like any big like federal funding where everybody's just writing an application and whoever has the best application with the most points wins. So like a SAMHSA grant would be an example of that. The second type is formula funding. This is where the formula determines the awardees. So if you meet the criteria in the formula, you get the grants. In our metaphor, right? If you live in the land of the giants, you get a golden goose. If you live in the land of the giants and you are a giant, you get more funding. You get a golden goose and the harp that sings you to sleep, right? A real life example of this in our area, in Cripple Creek, because there's gaming there, the state takes the gaming taxes, pulls them, and then redistributes them to everyone who meets the criteria for their gaming grant. So that would be a real life example. Continuation funding. This is where if you're already in, you're good. You get the next golden egg every year, but it can be kind of hard to break into that. So one of the better alternatives, if you're looking at something that's a continuation style grant, is to merge yourself with someone who already has the grant funding. So an example of that in the education world is the, gotta remember, the reading, I got it written down here, if I can find it. The Reading Assistance Grant, Chapter 1, Reading Assistance Grant. If you are a school and you have the grant funding, all you have to do is just maintain, and you get funding every year. All right, the last one is the pass-through funding, and this is where the government has the money, it shuffles down, and then at some point, an award is made and hopefully you get the money. So this might look like in our area, the federal government had some funds. They gave it to the state of Colorado through the Behavioral Health Administration. The Behavioral Health Administration took those funds and sent it to a pass-through entity, and that pass-through entity sent some money to us, right? So it trickles down. And the thing to know about those kind of continuation funds is that you have to meet all the criteria, all of the steps that the money has trickled down through. All right, so now we've got a foundation for the grant types. Where do we look? There's lots of places to look. One thing that's not up here is within your own organization. If you've already got grants that you've written, why not start there? Or if you've got grants that you've applied for and haven't been awarded, maybe you can try again. The grantors, the people with the money, they really need to get the money out. They can't hang on to it. So they're motivated to help you get the funds. They do have criteria that you have to meet. That's why there's so many different types of grants and different objectives for the grants. But if you can work with them, they really do need to get that money out there to you. The one thing that I thought was really cool recently is that backstory for a little bit. Back in the day, they used to send out actual books, like old phone books, but they were different grant opportunities. So you would read through your little grant opportunity book, find the one you want, and then apply for it. Today, they don't really do that. We're saving trees. So now you can go, like our congressional representative sends out a monthly email with all the different grant opportunities. And if there's something more or less, or I've got questions, then I can always reach out to them for that additional information. There are websites that you can go, and that's kind of the phone book style these days, where you can search through just so many different kinds of grants. Some of them are paid, but you can, the ones that I'm familiar with, you can still access them and use them free. And then if you want more information, then they want your money.
Karen,
Yes, sir.
the community resource guide, that used to be a big thick book.
Mm-hmm.
What is the annual cost for that, for access to that?
I don't know. That's a great question, but I will find out and get back to you.
That's one that I recommend to people a lot of times. We don't purchase it anymore, but I think it's probably around $250.
Okay.
And it's a good resource, every grant in the state.
Yeah.
What's it called? The Community Resource Center. It's the Colorado Grants Guide. Oh, I got you.
All right. So the next thing to know, or the next question to ask, is does the project that you have, does your storyline align with what their funding priority is? All right. So this is where I look at it as like a risk tolerance or an opportunity cost. So the risk is not necessarily someone's going to come and get you. The risk is you spent all this time and effort and you didn't get the funds, right? So it's how much time do you want to put into something that doesn't really align, and maybe you won't get any compensation back. So if Evangeline wanted to get a golden goose and she went to the land of the giants, she doesn't live in the land of the giants. She's not a giant. She's not going to get that golden goose. It doesn't matter how well crafted her narrative is. She doesn't meet the funding priority. So that's the very first thing to make sure that you're aligned. And the next, let me see the place. Oh, I didn't hit the right button. Who here is familiar with Joe versus the volcano? It's been a while. All right. We'll go back. We can't hear it anyway. All right. If you've got the grant, it doesn't do you much good if you can't manage the grant, or if you don't have the resources to buy your horse or maintain your horse. In our little example. You might need to increase your own capacity, and that could be something that you write into the grant and say, you know what, I don't have a farrier for my horse, but part of the grant funds would go towards getting that farrier so I can maintain the point of the grant. Same vein, if the grant has matching requirements, those might be negotiable. I know a lot of the state grants have opportunities. If you've got a need to renegotiate, you can do that. All right, now we're getting into a little bit more nitty gritty of what goes into the research. So you got to read the application. It might be a notice of funding, a funding opportunity, or a request for proposal. It's all the same thing, but you got to read it. Even if you've applied before, they will change it on you, especially when that year that you don't read it. And it's usually not huge dramatic changes. Usually they're little bits, But that's something that if you can show that you know what the changes are and you can speak to them, that goes a long way in your grant application. Similarly, you want to communicate with the grantors, right? Like I said, they want to give you the money. And if you talk with them, then they can help see if your project aligns. Or it might just give you bonus points, right? On the EMTS grant, right? We've got a RETAC coordinator that will work with us and make sure that we're working towards, and he's got a better, not better, but he's got an understanding of kind of what their priorities are. You got to plan and prioritize your paperwork. And that includes like the actual writing of the grant, as well as your letters of support. And if you need to grab quotes and stuff, sometimes those take time. So it's good to plan those out. If the grant has workshops, that's just another opportunity for FaceTime with the grantors and getting any questions you have answered. When you review the rubric or the scoring criteria and you look at the keywords, then you're able to better identify what their deliverables are. And in the world of grants, the deliverable is something that you have to do. They've given you money and they want a little something back. So that might be just reporting. It might be, what is it, receipts, the proof of purchase, something like that. For federal grants, you might need to obtain a couple of things. So the biggest one that the federal grant space is going back towards is the SAM.gov. They kind of went away, but starting the end of 2024, every federal grant will go through grants.gov, and you have to have a SAM.gov number. So that's a system of award management number. And you will need a unique entity identifier, your UEI. So those two pieces of information can take a little bit of while. They're red tape, it's federal. So you get working on those a bit earlier. Yes, sir.
What's the difference between the SAM's number and the DUNS number?
They are different. So the SAM's number you apply for, you know, apply might be a strong word. You sign up and say, this is our organization, and they assign you a number. The DUNS number is assigned to you without you doing as much. And that's the Dun and Bradstreet number is a private organization that assign numbers and people use it in business a lot. This past year, 2022, 2023, the federal awards figured that they didn't want to go through a single private provider for identification, so they've gone from the DUNS number to the UEI. So the UEI is similar to your old DUNS number. So just make sure you put the right one in the field.
If I could, one thing I would caution, my entity, the RETAC, we are a department of Cheyenne County. So we are a local government entity. And I, in my naivete, thought, oh, I need to get my own DUNS number back in the day. So I did. I went out and I got a DUNS number for Plains Peaks RETAC. As it turns out, I am not an entity. Cheyenne County is an entity, and they already had one. And so I really caused some issues for my local fiscal agent. My caution is know what it is you're applying for before you just click, I need one of these, because I learned the hard way. That was not good. Now I don't even need it. Okay.
Awesome. Especially for competitive grants, it's important to know who your competition is. But even for the not as competitive grants, it's good to know what their funding priorities are, if there are any political agendas, if it's going to impact a national or just a local area. All right, so now we've gone through so much research. It's really important to have a way to manage it. You could do papers and file cabinets, but I think most of us these days, right, we're going digital, so you can have digital file storages. Here's two examples. And I've got these as free resources to you guys if you would like. One is my personal management system with examples from an EMTS and a Create application. And the other is from learntowritegrants.org, right? So if you guys would like, there is a QR code. This does not go to the whole presentation, but it does get you to both of those examples of management. So I'm gonna pause just a minute. I see some phones. Okie doke. So now we've got all this research, we've got it organized. We need to do some actual writing. So in the writing portion of the grant, there are some things that you don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel. You can just gather them. So these sorts of things, your agency profile, if you've got a website with a write-up about your agency, look at that. You might want to tweak it, but you've got an agency profile already. Your financials, these are the things that you already create for your board of directors or for state reporting. You don't need to recreate those reports. Depending on the report, you might want to condense it a little bit. Lots of times, these forms are more check boxes that you're going through the application and having all the pieces of the application. So they don't necessarily need your 20-page budget. A 1-page budget would work. The budget is a big one, a balance sheet or a profit and loss. If you've got a financial outlook, a W-9 and an EIN or tax information, kind of that lumps into those financials that you might need to gather. Quotes and bids, especially if you're going after a horse or an ambulance or something like that. Credentials, that can be your resume or CV for whoever is going to be the person in charge of the money when it comes in. And then, of course, letters of support. When you're writing your letter of support, I should say, I like to draft a template letter of support and then send it out to people with that request. I found that it's really helpful in your letter of support to outline the project or what's going into the grant so that if that person that has received your draft letter doesn't actually know all the details of what's going on in your grant, they can read the letter of support and they can say, oh, this is actually something I support. And it cuts down on their time and your time, and that's been a handy thing. All right, then there's things that you actually have to do some writing. One of them is going to be your statement of need, the target population or underserved at-risk population that you would need to identify, the authority that you're working under. This might be something that you can grab from your profile, your agency profile, but if not, you need to at least acknowledge the authority. If you've got agency or community buy-in for your project, that is something to recognize. And your grant management capacity. So this is, again, you've got all the resources that you need to take that golden goose and turn it into a horse, or you've got everything except for the farrier, and you can just, this is where like you write it out and say, this is where we're at, this is what we need. Writing tips and tricks. This is kind of where I geek out. I think I love all the tips and tricks for writing. So one of them is to just do a brain dump. Don't write incomplete sentences, just bullet points, just ideas, or like speak into a voice recorder and have it transcribed for you so you can talk through what your answer to that particular narrative question is. I know this is triggering for at least some people in the room. You have to write in the active voice instead of the passive voice, right? So what that looks like is the subject is doing the action of the sentence. So instead of a Clydesdale horse will be bought with these funds, we're going to say Evangeline will buy a Clydesdale horse with these funds. So you've got a named subject doing the action. And then you're going to want to proofread, pull out anything that's superfluous. You don't need all of your filler words because that's going to eat up your word count. So just like cut it down to the very most important pieces of information. If there are pieces that you're not quite sure how to answer, you don't have to do it alone. You can ask someone else. I've done this many times. I've got some great support in my agency, and I can say, you know what, I don't really know how to answer this piece. Take whatever the other person has written for me and just make sure it merges well with what I've already got. And then technical writing versus creative writing. Creative writing is like the warm, feel-good story. It paints a picture, and it's important, but it's not everything. Most of the time, a grant is going to want a combination of technical writing and creative writing. So the technical writing is like just the very most basic information. There's no fluff, there's no feel good. It's just more like bullet points of what your answer to that question is. So you need a little bit of both so that you don't come across as a robot, but they're also getting the actual information that they are asking for. All right, so we might have seen this before. And you might have been using this and possibly been kicked out of it. And you might have even lost some of that information that you have typed in. I see some smiles. All right, so my recommendation is to take this and put your cursor at the top and push the button and go all the way down to the bottom, copy it all and put it in a Word document. So for something like this, like the Create grant, you can only go so far before you put information in. And that can make it really challenging to have a separate document with all of your answers. So I will go through and I will put a period or some character in every field. And then I can go to the next screen. And the caveat is you can't hit submit, right? When your application is just periods all the way through. But you can at that point get to the very last screen and copy everything and put it into your Word document. And then you can go at it. You can proofread it. You can spell check it. You can take it to someone else and say, hey, what do you think? And then manipulate it.
You can do a word count.
You can do a word count. Yes, absolutely. I love to put my answers in a different color font. So it's really easy to kind of jump your way through as you're looking. Some of these are not one-page applications, right? So it's easy to get lost. That's all I got for that. Now, artificial intelligence. This is a thing. This is a really cool thing. But it's not replacement for a human when it comes to grant writing yet, right? What the artificial intelligence can do, it can create really great abstracts or summaries based on what you've already written. It can come up with project timelines or evaluation criteria. It can edit and proofread. It's really good at that. And it can give you ideas. You can have jumping off points through the artificial intelligence. There's a lot of different kinds out there. They do different things. My caution, especially if you're using the text generating AI, and that's where it comes up with the words for you. Before you submit it in your grant, run it through a plagiarism. Run it through a plagiarism checker. It's just pulling from all over and it does not know necessarily not to plagiarize. So the grant process will more than likely put your application through a plagiarism checker. So you want to do that first so that you're not putting something in that's going to disqualify you out the gate. All right. So now a financial, oh yes,
Where do you find a plagiarism check?
Um,
Google it?
Google it. Yep, I was gonna give you the name off the top of my head and it was gonna be wrong, so Google it.
Grammarly do it too if you clear your tier.
Yep,
The other thing that AI is really useful, especially at the grants, is you can plug what you've already written in, have AI dumb it down for whoever the audience is gonna be. So like an example, last year we applied for congressional directed spending, we used words like emergency medical services and mobile integrated healthcare. And a lawmaker from a state that's different than ours categorically rejected our claim because since we're emergency medicine, we're gonna have to perform abortions and sex change surgeries and those sort of things. Plug it into ChatGPT, find and replace all of these words with words for a 5-year-old.
right, yeah,
It's my AI success story.
I like it. Yeah,
People. So like ChatGPT, we pay for the version 2.0, for a good source. Especially because we deal with lots of unique stories and narratives, you really don't want to have that patient information in source AI.
awesome.
You might repeat those for online, the
Oh.
answers as best you can.
Thank you.
Summarize.
So in order of events, right? Grammarly can do your plagiarism checker for you if you've got the paid version. And then success story, right? If you've got an application and it's getting categorically rejected because you're using fancy words like emergency services, you can have it be dumbed down to whatever level, maybe the level of 5-year-old, so that you've got ambulance. And that might help the reviewers who are not necessarily your peers, right? They're from all walks of life. And they might not know that emergency medical services does not include abortions and sex changes and all of this. So, and then there's a differentiation between open source and closed source AI. So open source, anyone else on the internet can also access what you've put into your ChatGPT or whatever. If you've got the closed source, the paid 2.0 version of ChatGPT, then you can keep it for yourself. You can still use it. It still works as the tool to generate ideas or summaries or change your reading level, but it's not going out to the whole world. And then I saw a hand in the back. Tim, did you have a comment?
Two? Is that your turn? No, you answered it already.
Sweet. Okay. All right. So the financial narrative. This is the place that details your financial position. It demonstrates kind of where you're at as an organization and substantiates your need. All right. And this is a great place where if Evangeline is planning to build a granary, she's got funds. She's got $2 million in her savings account. If she doesn't address that in her financial narrative section, then the grantor is going to say, why do you need money for this horse? You've got plenty over here. So this is where you can say, you know what? We've got this funds, but it is predetermined that it's going for something else. We can't use it for a horse, right? So you kind of explain where you're at, explain if you've got something that might look a little interesting from the grantor's perspective. So where you put in information about agency goals could go here. If you've got, you know, yes.
Aaron, a question for you. If you are part of a hospital, part of a fire department, part of a larger county, how can you pull your information out of that greater file?
Right. So this is where I would reference some of the conversations from yesterday about keeping track of the finances that you've got. And I'm thinking especially of the billing where if you've got a billing company that's doing your billing for you, it's really easy to let them do their thing and not keep your own metrics. But if you're keeping tabs on what's going on with your billing, similar, if you're keeping tabs on where your expenses and revenues are at, then you can speak to that.
Thank you.
I don't think I've said this yet. In your storyline, right, as you're describing your need and what you're going to do to address the need, money is the answer, but it's not the answer for the grant, right? You need to have a tangible thing, right? So as you're writing your financial narrative, you're going to reference back to the thing, the horse, as opposed to we need more money. So that's kind of where you can take the creative writing part and put it into your financial narrative. Supporting documents substantiate your claim. If you've got a letter of support and you reference it in your narrative, that's a good idea, but make sure it's attached, right? And if you reference a letter of support, make sure you've actually gotten that back from whoever so that the supporting documents actually support your application. If you get clarification from your grantor about what they're asking for, then your supporting documentation is just going to do that. It's going to support instead of having distracting things. So, an example, there was a grant that they wanted like 3 pieces of information. And as a very young grant writer, I said, cool, but I can make this beautiful document. They didn't need it, they didn't want it, and it caused more questions. So instead of supporting the documentation, it made it harder for the grantors to apply or to award for us. Most grants will ask for letters of support. Some will ask for letters of commitment. I'm thinking of the SAMHSA grant specifically. They're clear. They don't want support from other entities. They want to know who's going to do a thing, right? Who's committed to help you. So that's where, as you're reading through the application, it's important to just note what it is exactly that they're asking for. Read your supporting documentation before you attach it. If you've got a letter of support that says, we actually don't support this, you don't want to attach that one. And if you've got someone else that you can hand your application to and have them review it and make sure that you're not falling into that trap of, I know what I'm saying, and so I'm going to read into what's in my application. They can catch those things for you. That's good. Think I've got anecdotal stories, but that's kind of where we're at, kind of at the end. We're going to sum up our metaphor, right? So Evangeline decided that she wanted the golden goose. She went out and found one. She made sure it aligned and that she had all of the information that she needed. She did all the research. She put it all together, wrote her application, and she hit submit. The end, right? There's a lot more that goes into it though. And there's plenty of opportunity for learning more about what goes into the grant management or the funds management. Or if you've got, for instance, a really large grant, maybe you need someone specific to manage that grant. If you are awarded for a single grant $750,000 of federal funds, you're at a whole new audit level. So it's really important to know what you're getting into. So we could talk about grant management or like closeout management. More ideas for future conversations. So we can't really get to the happily ever after, right, in the story, but we can get to here. Are there any questions?
My thought is that there are a lot of people in this room who have written grants. Austin talked about a faux pas. I think that's like, this is, we were a little early, so I think this is a good opportunity to talk about some of those things that have worked well. Or maybe have not worked well, and you can help others not make the same mistakes.
Yes, Scott.
I was gonna ask a question, it was kind of along the same lines that you bring up about, you know, just taking some mistakes or whatever, but. Well, many of us in this room, not only have we written grants, we've actually reviewed grants, right? Either at the regional or the state level or whatever. And it's surprising as to some of the, you know, conflicting narratives and some of the things that you'll see in there. But my question was specifically to, I don't know how many other grants outside of like the state process or whatever have that process where you sit in a room or online and defend that grant. If you have any pearls about that interaction with the grant.
My experience has been that the state grants are the ones that have needed defense, right? So the like the local grants or local like foundations where they're looking to distribute money, they're looking at just your application. If they've got questions, they might reach out. At the federal level, they don't even reach out. If they've got questions, you're out. Yeah. So the state affords you at least an opportunity to come back and explain something or answer questions, which is a really nice thing. And I've only done the one. I've got, like I said, a really great agency that is supportive. So I think the biggest pearl that I have from the latest state grant is to not point everything back to the application. When they ask you a question, you say, well, you know, in paragraph 3 it says, but actually that means that whatever you wrote wasn't good enough. So you need to expound a little bit more. But yeah, I haven't seen the review outside of the state.
May I stand with you?
You may.
Aaron, has done a great job here explaining some of those things, and as I said, many of you have written them, you've reviewed them. One of the biggest issues that the state comes up with is that the narrative doesn't match the financials. They'll say, we're dirt poor, and yet they've got 500,000 in a CD somewhere. Well, you're right. That's okay, like for the state grant, you can have money, but you have to explain what it's being held for. Maybe it's a new building, maybe it's your match. You can't just say we need money. You have to explain it very well, because on the, like for the state grant, those reviewers, they're not you, they're commissioners, they're trauma surgeons, they're not your agency in East Dump Truck. You've got to be able to explain very well what it is you're trying to do.
Well, Jim, I would add too, I've done a lot of the state grants at the regional level and at the state level. So, and I would just give the perspective to anybody writing a grant, that they will dump on you a series of grants combined with some system you have to log into and figure out how to read things. And you will have some limited amount of time that you thought you were gonna start earlier, to read through all this stuff. So the more concise and clear that you can be and answer the questions you know are going to be in the reviewers' minds, the better off you are. Because I think most of the reviewers are trying to score grants well, and they're just trying to connect dots to scoring tools. And the state is very good in their EMS grants about publishing that scoring tool and how those ranges of scores work. So the quicker you can help the person struggling with the new system the state just switched to connect those dots and put a high number in there, the better off I think you are, has been my experience from the far
Awesome, thanks, Sean. Yeah,
Yeah, you know, current funding plan. Kathy, as on the finance, I'm on a CFO, the public side. And, oftentimes individuals will report ranking directly on financial statements, so they'll recognize revenue when they shouldn't. Or they'll put it in unearned revenue, or they'll book it, like I said, matches incorrectly. And going back to the narrative conversation, if you've done it historically with past grants, it gets really hard to defend that if you are in front of a panel. And so you wanna make sure that your reporting is really buttoned down and you're connecting it up to your department to finance that has to put that on an audited financial statement somewhere else. Cause if that audit narrative doesn't match, then you have to ask auditors to amend your audit statements to be able to do that for you, which is never a fun experience when it comes to the grant reporting. And then in addition to that, if you hit a certain threshold, you're obviously putting yourself out of single audit territory, which requires your grant documentation to be that much better. When it comes to specifically expenses that is covering the tracking mechanisms for it, so that way, when the audits come through, even though you're not defending it in front of a panel, you are defending it at the state audit level, which will then hinder you from getting future grants federally or state level as well. So the reporting mechanism, while it's aimed to accomplish that nobody really wants to do it, and probably one of the more important sides of the grant piece is the back end of it, not just the front end.
yeah, thank you.
Tim?
I was just thinking, once again, having done a review of state grants. As Eric Schmidt would say, long enough to cover the subject, short enough to keep it interesting. I have read some really, really long narratives in some of these state grants, and you get almost halfway through the narrative and you don't care anymore. Because, I mean, but you gotta remember, some of these folks are reviewing 20, 30 grants, and you wanna increase your chance of success, keep it short, keep it concise. And once again, re-emphasize that powerful tool like a chat GPT. If you're like me that writes a lot of word vomit, well, write the word vomit. Put it into that closed source GPT and you put in the beginning part of it in 500 words or less, summarize this statement. And it's amazing how quickly you can get a really good statement.
For whoever else will do our 2023 provider grant, I apologize for the glitch that repeated the same paragraph 22 times.
Too, Kim, I think there are some interesting grants out there. I know a bunch of folks have done the mineral impact grants previously through DOLA. That's a super interesting system compared to the EMTS grant in particular. I mean, I think I find it interesting that the basic approach on that grant is to schmooze your DOLA rep as kind of the starting point, and then they let you into the system. And if it's under $200,000, there is no board of inquisitors you have to deal with. It's just all on the person you just schmoozed to approve it. And then over $200,000, it gets more interesting. And those are usually all about cooperation and multi-agency and regional impact is how they view the world. So that's interesting. We also just got $800,000 for radio equipment off the Safe Streets for All program, just by teaming up with our other Safe Streets for All is interesting. It's a Department of Transportation grant. It's funded to the level of $5 billion annually. They've been desperately trying to encourage EMS agencies to include themselves because our federal office is housed in the Department of Transportation. So we added a post-crash care piece for radio equipment and EMD to literally a grant that was for highway improvements and a traffic circle. For the tune of $15 million, we just added $800,000 on top of that, and actually made the grant score better because it actually had that component. So there's interesting collaboration opportunities out there like that too. So SS4A is the acronym the feds have created for that grant, for those of you dying to Google that and then team up with your public works people to, you know, add random stuff to their highway projects.
So is that the key to that thing? Cause that was gonna be my next question, because I know that some people have had some SS4 success. But when I read that, I feel I cannot for the life of me figure out how to create a nexus to my EMS agencies.
So basically, the nexus on that one is there's like a planning grant phase and then there's an implementation grant phase. And it's the highway people who are doing that, so you have to find the person in your neighborhood who's already applied and done that. In our case, it was the public works director, who I hunted incessantly. To be like, hey, I can add that ambulance stuff to your grant, improve your score, you know, sounds like fun. It was actually identifying that person who had already done the planning grant. To add the implementation side, and it's a couple of years of playing the game, but it's big money.
Well, and I would say to like piggyback off of that, sometimes you look at a grant and you're like, that sounds really cool, but I don't necessarily fit into the category. So we had an experience back in COVID, right? And there was an environmental protections grant available through DOLA, and it's great, but we're not really, our agency really doesn't do recycling, right? We're not really into the environmental protections, but we had, I don't know if you guys know Mark Radke. He's was able to take that and kind of spin the storyline, right? So instead of saying, well, we're not going to really go hug a tree, but we want your money, he was able to say, you know what? We are using so many face masks. And where are those face masks going? To a landfill. Well, we need some pappers to keep our people safe. Yeah, but to keep the masks out of the landfill, right? And so with a little bit of a creative look at it, you might be able to take something that looks like it's out of reach and bring it back. And that one had a fun unicorn experience. We heard about the grant on Wednesday. Mark wrote it and applied for it on Thursday, and we had a check on Friday. Like, that doesn't usually happen, but yeah.
What about the difference between a nonprofit application and a government application? Is there major difference? Some firms won't do government, they'll
Right.
only do nonprofits. What if I'm a government and yet I need to get this grant?
So I think you've got a couple of options. Most of them you have to do some planning beforehand, right? It's really hard to make changes on the fly. But if you've got a nonprofit that works with your government agency, then you can apply under the nonprofit for a nonprofit only grant.
We did this with you. We wanted to, as the region, we wanted to apply for a siren grant. And as the region, you have to be an ambulance service to apply for the siren grant. And so went to UPass and Aaron was able to go ahead and apply. This time we weren't successful, but that had nothing to do with the whole project. The whole point is, if you aren't eligible, someone is, and you need to figure out who that is, figure out how to collaborate with them. Funds are out there, but you've got to take the time to find them. And probably more importantly, you've got to take the time to manage that grant. Because if you were successful once, how many times have you been successful for the siren grant?
7,
To the tune of $250,000 each time,
200.
200,000 each time. Do it right once, and it's going to follow. And you've done that for UPass, you've done it for Upper Pine. The point being, do it right the first time, and the funds will follow again, because you can use the same documentation over and over.
Say that anybody in the room is familiar with grant management who has done an AFG recently enough that they have had to keep and do the whole civil rights evaluation DEI piece of that grant.
Ask that online.
Is there anyone that has done the AFG grant recently enough that you have to go through the civil rights and DEI? Is it evaluation?
I wondered if Tad Negro.
Did we have to do that for one of our behavioral health?
Yeah, right. It was actually Colorado Springs Health Foundation requires that you have a diversity, equity and inclusion program. And I'd certainly be willing to share ours with anybody.
It's that, but there's like a 15-page, 10 bullet list of all the things that have to be included. And I'm on like my 4th iteration of trying. And I mean, it's the better plan, so you can't get help from me. So I was curious if anybody had successful, like I'll pay you like that's good. That training, yeah.
We were not, we did the same thing and it just got to be way too much. Work, even though even our DI Division in Human Resources was stood up and able to speak to those things that just, the check boxes became too much. They're gonna reevaluate it 25.
Yeah, I mean, it was a $63,000 grant. At this point, I'm ready to
Yeah.
get all of it back because it's not worth what you've gone through to get it.
All right, any other? I feel like this has been great discussion. Any other thoughts or questions? All right,
Very good. Thank you, Aaron.
thank you.